go to conditional use for everything. And now we have a motion with 3 amendments. We're open the floor for public comment. Are we to vote or not vote, but discuss? Thank you. Mr. Hamner, yes, sir, please.
Well, quite Frank Hamner, 11 North Limemore Road. I think you're going to have to go back for a first reading anyway. The ordinance is advertised as to revise permitted uses along Park Avenue, south of Comstock Avenue. No, it's not. And providing the definitions for fast casual. There's no definitions for fast casual in this ordinance. And fine dining restaurants. And in fact, turn this thing on. It's not doing staff any favors to sort of rush these things and say, let's put it to bed. I mean, that's becoming part of the problem. Can I get the Elmo? Sorry. I mean, what P&Z said when they looked at this, there was a 7-0 vote at P&Z to approve the ordinance for fast casual restaurants. This ordinance actually prohibits fast casual restaurants. So the whole thing is advertised and noticed, and I wish I could have gotten somebody's attention before this, but, and I hope when they televise it, they don't charge us by the word. But you've got to start over. I mean, if you look at the ordinance, and God bless the effort. I mean, I feel bad for Jeff. No good deed goes unpunished. But you can tell it's rushed. Hannibal Square is not even capitalized. Commercial district. There's grammar errors. Whatever the pressure to get this thing in front of the city commission tonight was too much pressure. Okay, it needs to go back to P&Z. It is a wholesale change in the ordinance. Now, a couple of other points are that it's hard to say without you just really nitpick it to death that either BurgerFi or Panera have been a detriment to the avenue, okay? You can't blame any one restaurant for what the problem is. Everybody wants to kind of say BurgerFi is the problem. The problem is the hypocrisy of the ordinance and what we've allowed. Everybody says, well, Panera's okay because they got parking. I mean, think about that for a minute. You need parking to not provide table service. I mean, where you need parking is if you're going to have table service, and people are going to sit and they're going to occupy a restaurant for a long time. It is the most hypocritical definition and excuse for having somebody that everybody really we just need to kind of admit at some point, Panera's cool. We wanted Panera. We made it work. Okay? So, yes, this ordinance needs to change. That's why I've worked with Jeff to try to get it to change. In fact, it was me who told you, hey, if McDonald's wants to provide table service, they can do it. And anybody that knows me knows I'm as upset as anybody about how Firehouse Subs got here. But the reality is, it proves the point. So it does need to change, but you can't legislate out. If you say, oh, you can't have any non-permitted uses, you also just swallowed up all your exceptions. You can't have coffee shops now. You can't have ice cream shops. You can't have any of that because they're non-permitted, prohibited uses. So this needs some thought. It needs to go back to P&Z. Park Avenue Merchants Association needs to get real and realize that the ordinance is not perfect, and if it was perfect, we'd still have the same ordinance we had in 1977, and that one wasn't perfect, so we changed it again in 1987, and that one wasn't perfect, but oh my God, this one is. Okay? It's not. It needs a lot of work. But just from a procedural point of view, you need to go back to P&Z and start over.
Frank, I'm going to take time out before I take more public comment and ask Mr. Brown to weigh in on, is anything in the ordinance, even as presented, different than what's been advertised?
The problem is the title of the ordinance apparently has not been changed from the last time it was presented. That's
just tell me, is it a problem or not at this point?
It's a Scrivener's error. I think you could go forward, change it as we're discussing, and bring it back for a first reading again. The problem is the ordinance was never, the title was never changed, so I do think it
that's
would
a problem. I mean,
it's going to require first reading again.
That's like saying I'm really good looking, come and see me, and yet at the end I'm really not, and it's nobody wants to see it. I mean, that's if this had been advertised as a Scrivener's error.
Yes, it was a Scrivener's error. They didn't change.
I don't know that. I mean, it seems like it's far more invasive than a Scrivener's error.
Well, the definition, the actual body of the ordinance tries to give you a complete definition of fine dining restaurant, whereas the title to the ordinance was from the last time you considered this many months ago, because it talks about revising permitted uses south of Comstock. Well, when you read the body of the ordinance, it doesn't do that.
Mr. Mayor, I would request that you table the ordinance and let us take it through the P&Z and the other process. Let's get it right before it comes back to you.
I'm gonna move the tabling of the ordinance
Second.
as presented. Is there a second? Clerk, read the roll.
Commissioner Leary?
Yes.
Commissioner Sprinkle?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper?
Yes.
Commissioner McMakin?
Yes.
Mayor Bradley?
Yes, I'll permit 3 minutes of comment if people came to present and discuss this and help us on this. If there's those in the audience who want to discuss what they think we're trying to get done here and help us in this process.
That's much appreciated. My name is Patrick Chapin. I'm the president and CEO of the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce. I will say that the learning curve here is natural. We went through it, and we've had multiple meetings with Jeff and as a Park Avenue merchants and the board. So it's the context of confusion is normal, and I applaud you guys for taking a time out. I will say, well, rather than state some of the concerns, I think we can do that in a different format. I think that I did want to comment on something that was said by our previous speaker, because I think it's important to say that the merchants haven't weighed in on this conversation in terms of the more restrictive language. I think we all believe we want more restrictive language, but to say that the merchants should get real without knowing where we stand is a little unfair. I think the challenge is, and even to the staff's, statement of the merchants wanted, back in '83 the merchants wanted, in '90 the merchants wanted. That dictates that the merchants are a policymaker and we're not. So at some point there was dialogue, conversation, and agreement, and policy was agreed upon by our elected officials. I think you have to, in this process, whether you want to or not, you have to talk about what's happened in the past, and that's BurgerFi, because I think that's where the heartburn happens. It isn't necessarily the ordinance, it's the enforcement of the ordinance. And we, I think, want to make sure that whatever ordinance is in place, that there's clearly defined how do we hold people accountable. Because no one, I believe, could argue that the current ordinance that BurgerFi came in under, that they are adhering to that policy or that ordinance. That's just, I don't see how anyone could argue that. So we're just conscious of, as the conversation progresses, that we are clear on what the policy is and how we enforce the policy and what steps there are to be, that are made for the policy. And lastly, I would say the struggle with dictating, aesthetics or regulating aesthetics is just the reality of your jobs, because you can't have it both ways. You can't say this is uncomfortable about regulating, but then, otherwise we'd have a tattoo parlor on every corner. We'd have a real estate office on every, front shop of Park Avenue. So that's just the reality of what comes. I think having a conditional use process where there's a safety net to get those Ruth Chris and those Olive Gardens that may not fit, but allow a process. And I will just close by saying that's kind of where our first concern was the language of the commission approval process, that last sentence. We didn't understand that definition. That sounded like conditional use, but it didn't really go to conditional use. So thank you very much for your time and your hard work on this important item.
Hi, good evening. I'm Wayne Brady-Macheski. I'm one of the owners of Casino 214, and I'm also the president of the Park Avenue Merchants Association. I'll make this quick. I know this is it's a multifaceted issue, but I think what would be really helpful is the definition. Fine dining is actually one way in which you can provide table service. The other way is casual dining. So a good example would be 310. They offer table service in a casual dining environment. Luma is table service in a fine dining environment. So that really, when you, P&Z and whoever writes those ordinances, and before you guys get that next look, they really need to look at that. It's very industry standard. It's very easy. You can even Google it. Wikipedia has these definitions, but I think that would be really helpful, because right now it says fine dining. It's table service, two kinds, fine dining, casual dining, and you can have both. Casual dining was really created for more of a price point. It's less expensive. It's, The other issue with BurgerFi is just the fast casual. And from the merchants, we have had a lot of people that are upset about it. I think there was that impression that fast casual was not allowed here. It's not a Chipotle on 1792. So I guess, this new one kind of defines that, or, but as it is now, they are supposed to require table service, and they do not. So why do we have codes if they're not enforced? And what is that process? If they are approved to provide table service, what mechanism is in place to then verify that when they actually open, they're doing that? And if they're not, whose responsibility is it to do something about it? I mean, why have codes if they're not enforced? So that is an important issue that I think we need to cover and look at when we go through this. Checks and balances, and I don't know if there is one now in the city with P&Z and code enforcement. I don't know. And I'm sorry, I'm bringing up a question and not, but that's something I'd like to look at. And code enforcement, I think for the merchants that do follow the code, they feel that it's not fair because 90% of people are following the code. There's about 10 that aren't. It gives this feeling of distrust. It gives this feeling that we're not a community, and that goes against, I think, what Winter Park is all about. We're community driven, we're here to support each other. Yes, we might disagree on things, but we pull together and work together. And as a city right now, because we're not enforcing these things, it's really going against, and it's creating havoc and uncomfortableness. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Terranova, 151 North Virginia Avenue. I concur in what the last two speakers said. I just wanted to go over this item of enforcement, how we're going to actually treat fine dining, regardless of how we define it. And I know you all are struggling with this. But I looked at the statement that the Firehouse subs submitted in terms of complying with fine dining. And I'd like to read two sentences to you because they don't meet my definition, what I think about what's fine dining. They said they will provide full table service to anyone who wishes to be seated. They also said that guests wishing to order themselves will be accommodated at the cashier station. That's fine dining? I don't think so. I don't care what your definition of it is. I don't think so. A lot of it has to do with intent. A lot of it has to do with enforcement. Pass an ordinance, how it's going to be enforced. I think that was addressed by the other speakers. I wish you well in this effort because I think that one of the things that makes Park Avenue different than other places is the fact that we just have fine dining. However you define that, what your definition is, what my definition is. But I think it's important to get it right. I think this whole thing needs some more work, and I think you were right to table it. And take your time and get it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Other citizens wishing to speak to this? I'm going to close it for public comment. This matter's been tabled. Commissioner Bridge wants to speak.
No, sir.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Cooper, wait that.
Table on property.
What did you want to speak about?
I just thought that it might be helpful if we decided what it was that we wanted to achieve and then turned to the legal staff and said, can you craft an ordinance that achieves what we want to achieve? Because this is difficult, and I personally struggled with trying to figure out exactly how to prohibit non-fine dining, in my mind, fast food, without prohibiting or hurting the restaurants that we would like to have that are formula dining or are franchises. Because around the world, most of the research you find prohibits franchises, but that's not what we want to do if we want to be able to bring in a Ruth Chris. So I just think if we could agree as a group on what it is we're trying to achieve, if we send this back to P and Z to try to write the language again, we're just gonna have another iteration of people's opinions trying to write the language, when if we could agree as a policy on what we would like to achieve, and then allow our legal staff to craft the words and then send it back to P and Z for review, it might have a better ending and a more enforceable ending. It's just a thought, but I think we do kind of agree on what we're trying to achieve.
I don't
That
We
that
might
could be the
agree
problem.
to the-
Understand, okay, I thought we might.
I don't think it's ever been there.
The current ordinance is squishy,
Yep.
and we predicted this, and we had a lot of people advocate, don't change the current ordinance. Well, here we are changing the current ordinance because it was squishy. And I don't, you know, our definitions are very loose and fluid at this point. Is Panera fine dining in the strictest of definitions? Absolutely not. Is it casual dining? Probably not even that either in the strictest of definitions. So, you know, and Patrick, to your point, I think we have a force in power that's different than just a commission that decides those things. We have an economic force that we have to have realistic views. So I'm not sure it's the commission's responsibility to say no to your favorite brand and yes to mine. I don't know. I don't know if that's the best way to do it either. Obviously, some of our boards need to wrestle with this along with our city attorneys. They've heard our conversation. Mr. Knight, you've heard our conversation.
Yes.
I'm gonna move to city commissioner's conversation.